So for me, this would be the manga that proved everyone wrong, that somewhat done the impossible, that a lot of people thought would actually fail. The manga that is known as DanDaDan. Now, I've talked about this series quite a bit. I have a very high appraisal and love for it. It's honestly just a really great story to read. It's super unique, it has such a vibrant identity, and it's all woven together with this chaotic nature that can't really be found elsewhere. And this is one of the primary things that I wanted to talk about today. Kind of bring forth a different perspective for this story and kind of showcase its rise to fame a little bit. But more so how that rise to fame was very turbulent, very unsure and uneasy, and was quite a difficult path to actually take. Not only for this manga, but for any manga, within any magazine, within any demographic. If you've read DanDaDan, the word chaotic comes to mind, and stories that use chaoticness that is interwoven with their concepts, with the architecture of the story, with the themes. All of these integral components that build your narrative will be overlaid with this chaoticness. And when you're writing a story, especially one like DanDaDan, wielding it appropriately, making that chaoticness controlled and precise, and knowing when to use it, knowing when to utilize it to its potential, to its maximum, to its limit, and setting very flexible parameters is an absolute key. It is the utmost importance. This probably all sounds super convoluted, but to boil it down to very simplistic terms, writing a chaotic story is really hard because it touches every single facet of your narrative experience, from your characters to your symbolism to your lore to your foreshadowing to any sort of creative idea that you want to implement. Because of this, there is a lot that can go wrong very quickly, very rapidly, very out of control, and one that can rarely be reeled back. If you cannot wield that chaoticness, if you cannot control it or comprehend it or to make it precise in any sort of manner, it will run your story into the ground and it will bury it. You will not be able to bring it back. It's a dangerous element, a dangerous tool, and one that has to be used with care. So when a story like DanDaDan comes along that embodies it, that embraces its pure nature, it's not only impressive, but ultimately scary, I believe, for the author. Because there is so much that can go wrong in so many different ways, you would naturally come to think that the author would play it safe, that they would implement certain safety nets so the story doesn't spiral out of control. And while those safety nets are definitely there and are true, they're not as publicly acknowledged. You won't necessarily see them. They're not like a glaring construct that's in your face. Instead, what you might actually notice with DanDaDan is how balanced it actually is. And there's a prime example that I want to put it next to, Chainsaw Man. See, Chainsaw Man is also a story that wields chaoticness. Its parameters are very far apart, and there's a lot of uniqueness and creativity that can be implemented within it. However, it's offset with its cast of characters and the journey or the process being rather simplistic, but only on the surface. And this is where Fujimoto-esque, or the style that is Fujimoto, comes into play, and how he's kind of adopted this style of storytelling where the meat, the bones, the core structure is very chaotic, but the surface is super simplistic. But underneath that surface, for your characters, for your world, for your lore, for your themes, for your symbolism, is depth, is nuance, is a completely different story, but one that isn't outright given to you. So while that chaos is offset by the simplicity, if you want, you can dive a little bit further. You can go down and grasp that beautiful nectar that's filled with such beautiful and thought-provoking writing. You don't have to, but it's definitely there. Funny enough, because of Chainsaw Man and its approach to this type of storytelling, I would like to believe actually helped the reception towards DanDaDan. People weren't really used to this style, but fell in love with Chainsaw Man rather quickly. And if you are one of those individuals, the transfer over to DanDaDan is seamless. It is almost perfect. I don't think you could have an easier transition from story to story. DanDaDan offsets its chaoticness a little bit differently, however. It does also have its super simplicity within its characters, but more so in the quirky department. A lot of them are very obnoxious and over the top. And if you were to gauge that depth underneath that simplicity, it's probably not as drastic or nuanced or as deep as Chainsaw Man, but it is definitely there. And it's only growing, it's expanding. It may not be as thought-provoking as Chainsaw Man, but it provides a nice feel for the people that want it. believe it or not, this isn't what offsets DanDaDan. It's an added benefit. It helps string along the story, but where it truly comes into play is how much creativity it introduces. And this comes in the form of its parameters. They are very far apart. And what these parameters are basically the logical continuity of the story, so to speak. What could be possible within these parameters. This might sound weird for storytelling. Of course, you can add anything, right? But if you're adding something that isn't within the parameters or continuity of your story, it's going to seem rather weird. It's going to seem very out of place. A lot of people probably won't like it because it just doesn't make sense. This wasn't teased before. This wasn't foreshadowed before. This is just randomly added to elevate the story into a different direction. And while there is a lot of things that go into it to make it work and to potentially make it possible, one of the ways of leading into it is with that foreshadowing, is with the pre-acknowledgement that this is something that you most likely want to do within the future. DanDaDan doubles down on its creativity, and having such a wide option of things to do, anything and everything is at its disposal, and it makes sense. So it is directly channeling this chaotic storytelling and utilizing it or weaponizing it in a way that is within its own parameters, that makes the story continuously engaging, continuously creative, and continuously unique. The experience constantly shifts and changes, and you don't know what to expect, but it all makes sense. So to put simply, it's just a story refueling itself with chaoticness, but it's super controlled. Again, probably super convoluted, but to put it into simpler terms, think of every single monster, alien, ghost, spirit, whatever it may be that is within DanDaDan. Think of how crazy and just out there that they truly are. You have a giant crab, you have a granny that runs really fast, you have the Loch Ness monster or some lizard version of it that shoots laser beams out of its mouth. You have a boxing crustacean, you have an alien UFO, you have a giant Mongolian deathworm. I don't know how I'm going to show images of all these things, but see how crazy and chaotic all of this is? This would only work and make sense for a lot of stories that has a really wide open parameter for its narrative. And this is how DanDaDan uses its chaoticness and fuels it into each of these things. You don't know what you're going to get, you don't know what to expect, you don't know what type of creativity is going to come into play, but it all works, it all makes sense, and it's absolutely endless. To me, it's kind of funny when you showcase it in categories. You have aliens, spirits, curses, mythology, ghosts, etc. These are the two biggest pillars of the story, and this is where the chaoticness drip feeds into. So while reading DanDaDan, you have these quirky characters that are inherently simplistic, that have a bit of depth there if you want them, mixed with these two categories of aliens and spirits, ghosts, curses, mythology, etc. And you have this blend that would not work anywhere else. You have this blend that is so beautifully digestible, that is so creative, that is just inherently fun. Now I understand it's not for everyone, and a portion of it is going to come off as being overtly corny, which I think is perfectly fine, because it's not corny in a bad way. If anything, it's self-aware, but that's entirely my perspective, and it's going to be different for you. Maybe this isn't the story for you. Maybe you don't want to see a crustacean boxing a giant Loch Ness monster shooting laser beams, or a super fast turbo granny that's been turned into a stuffed cat. I get it. It can be overwhelming, but that's why I think Chainsaw Man was such a great introduction to this type of storytelling, to this type of chaotic writing. It's not often that you get stories like this, especially within Weekly Shonen Jump or Jump Plus. Since DanDaDan's release, considering it has 50 odd chapters at this point, it has done nothing but continue to prove everyone wrong. That it isn't a one-trick pony, that it isn't overly chaotic, that is completely uncontrollable, that it can have finesse, that it can control itself, and that it can weave not only an enjoyable narrative experience, but also one that is inherently unique and has such a prominent identity and footprint. When I say that it has proved everyone wrong, a majority of that is going to be for people that thought it would fail, but it's going to be for people like myself and potentially you as well, where it has proven us wrong in the department of success, of uniqueness, of how creative it could truly get, of creating a brilliant experience that continues to thrive furthermore. That over the short amount of time that it's been published, nothing has dulled from it. It has grown, it has learned, it has formed into so many different directions. And while for some it may not be the best thing that ever exists, but it doesn't have to be. For myself, it has become a story that stands out so prominently, so proudly, so impressively. It has such an alluring aura to it, with its own individuality, with its own stylistic sense that is completely and entirely unique to itself. I don't think you will find a story like DanDaDan elsewhere. You might get similar to it. The closest thing may very well be Chainsaw Man, its predecessor, and you can even see a lot of that chaotic influence from Chainsaw Man within DanDaDan, but there's still so much that separates them. There's still so much that makes them thrive within their own departments, and without a doubt, DanDaDan is continuing to grow in such a brilliant and beautiful direction. I for one couldn't be more than excited to see where its future goes and how far it will truly go. What would an anime look like? How would the world respond to that anime? Would they absolutely love it? Would they think it's too crazy, too chaotic? Would the anime be able to capture that finesse and wield that chaoticness similar to how the author does it? In that regard, only time will tell. I am very excited for its future. It is undoubtedly, unequivocally bright and vibrant and successful, and I couldn't be more happier for it. Endtime. So with that, welcome to the end of the video. If you have made it this far, thank you. I appreciate you. I apologize if this was a little bit convoluted or out of control or just confusing in some aspects. Hopefully I can simplify it as much as possible, but I wanted to express why I think DanDaDan is as enjoyable and successful as it truly is, from this perspective at least. I'd love to know your thoughts on the series, on its chaoticness and on its identity. How do you feel about all of the unique aspects when it comes to aliens and curses and spirits, ghosts, the lore, the mythology behind everything? Because the author has showed them in such varying ways that it just makes for a super fun time. Let me know in the comment section below. But with that, I want to thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Leave a like and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Drink plenty of water, and I will see you within the next one. Goodbye.